Can you read that? Okay. Hi. My name is Gregg Bordowitz, and we're here for the second of 3 episodes in Answers with Questions, a series that we're doing for Triple Canopy. Today's episode is devoted to the figure of the rabbi as a learned person, not necessarily a specifically gendered person, but as a person who holds wisdom. I was just consulting with the Pirkei Avos, which is a wisdom book that Jews read from when they're a very young age and continue to read throughout their life. It's not a book of laws, it's just a book of suggestions and possible ways of conducting one's life ethically. And I was reading something that you might have heard, but not known that it comes from the Avos. Rabbi Hillel says, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? In tradition, in the Avos, that means that each person understands themselves as an individual with an important contribution to make, and that one's own personal conduct matters, but one is also always a member of a community. And in the Avos, it instructs us to never withdraw ourselves from the community, because we can only achieve our individual potential through our efforts in concerts with others. And actually in the Avos, it says a number of places you shouldn't alienate yourself or withdraw from the community. Again, it's not a law, it's just advice that is meaningful to me. And many of you have seen this. Actually, there's historically, if you look at many protests over the 20th century, this question, if not now, when, has been on many, many protest signs throughout many, many struggles. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you. Nutritious and delicious. I just got to find Hillel again. I think it's time to take a few questions. Let's go to some questions. Thank you for sending them. Monica writes, Dear Gregg, I've been thinking a lot about divine intervention. My therapist says this is an infantile wish, that some unforeseen or invisible force would step into our lives to take care of business and make the hard decisions so that we don't have to. What do you think? That happens to be a question I think about a lot, because I believe in God, but I don't believe in an interventionist God. There is a tradition within Judaism that teaches us that divine intervention requires human action. And we get that from Exodus. When Moses is leading the Israelites out of Egypt, and they come up against the Sea of Reeds, and the Pharaoh's soldiers are at their back, Moses looks up to God, and God basically says, why are you looking at me? Go into the water. And that's interpreted as, at that juncture, someone else had to show faith in addition to Moses. So it's much debated who actually jumped in the water first, but it couldn't be Moses. Someone else had to jump in and show faith before the Sea of Reeds could be parted. And that is interpreted. I'm actually taking the specific interpretation from a Jewish scholar named Emil Fackenheim, who formulated this idea that divine intervention requires human action. And this is the basis of Jewish liberation theology. If you think of the famous example of Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched with Dr. King in Selma and protested the Vietnam War with Dr. King, who famously said, Heschel said, "I pray with my feet." This is very much late 20th century theology that human action precedes any divine intervention whatsoever. We have to take that leap of faith. Can I please have another question?
Hey Greg, it's Rabbi Miriam. My question for you is, what are the things that you keep returning to? And specifically, I'm curious about who are the writers or artists that you keep returning to.
Thank you, Rabbi Miriam. That's a great question. Such a pleasure, Taka Amachaya, to see you online. Thank you for asking that question. Rabbi Miriam Grossman is the rabbi of my temple, Kolot Chayenu. And so I'm immediately wanting to answer that question, saying that I return to you, Rabbi Miriam, every Shabbos to hear what you have to say. I really think you're a Heschel for our times. And I'm not just kissing up to the rabbi. I really mean that. I look to you as a great source of inspiration and learning. I return to Nechama Leibovitz, the great 20th century biblical scholar. And I have recently returned to the poet Paul Celan, which is Celan is an abiding figure for me, very important German language poet who was a Holocaust survivor and is famously difficult to read. I find that now in these difficult times, it might be counterintuitive to read poetry that comes out of such almost indescribably difficult historical situation as the Shoah. And yet I'm very much vexed by the way Celan can describe the ashes falling from the sky, which is really a reference to the crematoria, within the formal housing that is singular to Celan. So I'm very interested in this question of how does one use aesthetics to describe horror without sensationalizing it, and also addressing the human emotions that we share in facing indescribable horrors. I know that's not a very fun answer. Today's episode is special. Each episode is special and unique, but today is special because I'm very happy that we'll be speaking with Joy Ladin and Kendall Thomas. I am thrilled to welcome Joy Ladin, who is a poet and a writer and an inspiration to me. I just want to credit Joy's books, which I strongly advise everyone to read, all of them. The Soul of the Stranger, Reading God and Torah from a Transgender Perspective, is just 2018. The Future is Trying to Tell Us Something, New and Selected Poems, 2017. And Through the Door of Life, A Jewish Journey Between Genders, 2012. I am a great fan of Joy Ladin, and it occurs to me, Joy, that we have become what I consider us good friends, and we've become good friends, but we've never met in person. This is like a pandemic friendship. We first met when you invited me to be on your show, Containing Multitudes, which is on Jewish Live, which is a great show. And now we converse pretty regularly.
It's a pleasure to be friends with you. I look forward to a time when we get closer than two adjoining Zoom windows.
Yes.
But But it's been a pleasure to be next to your Zoom window and to be able to talk about so many important things with you. It's just been delightful. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Thanks for being here. Yeah, our conversations range from poetry to theology, um, everyday life. And I'm really happy for you to join me here because I thought we could combine all of those things that we shared together, our love of words and poetry and religion and our passion for social justice, which we both share. And let's maybe try to help some people or learn some things from the questions that people have for us.
Awesome. Daniel writes, are there actual blasphemies I should be worried about? Well, I would say, Daniel, right off the bat, I would be worried about giving the power to other people to tell you what you should be worrying about. That's sort of a joke, but it's also kind of serious. You know, don't let other people tell you how you should feel, and certainly don't let them tell you what you should fear. Gregg, what are you thinking right off the bat?
I mean, I don't like to marshal the notion of blasphemy in any way, because I don't want to assume that position of moral authority. But it does occur to me that there's some things that come out of politicians' mouths that come pretty close. I don't know, is racism blasphemous? Is sexism blasphemous? Is intention of violence blasphemous? What do you think?
Well, I think that there's a broad category of bad forms of public discourse. Jewish law has a lot about the power of language and the kinds of things that one shouldn't say. Judaism doesn't do a lot about regulating thought or even belief, but it does have strong regulations on various kinds of speech that are damaging. And I would say what you're referring to are public speech, particularly by authority figures, that promote hatred, that promote fear, that directly or indirectly hurt people. There are other ways of thinking about blasphemy, and because Daniel didn't say very much, it's hard to know what his framework is. So one way of thinking about blasphemy is as a word that's used to regulate people within a faith community and to indicate to them when they are violating what are supposed to be the shared beliefs that constitute the faith community. So, not every faith community is based on a shared set of beliefs. Most Jewish communities that I know of actually aren't. But there are communities that I think the Essenes probably fell into this category, where the community is bound together by very core sets of assumptions about how the universe works, about the relationship between the divine and humanity, sacred texts, and members of the community who say things that are seen as undermining or violating or straying from or contradicting those core beliefs get labeled as blasphemers. From the other side, it seems to me like there are a lot of secular people who enjoy being able to say things that seem blasphemous, even though because they're secular, they're not actually committing blasphemy in the sense that I just said. They're not members of a faith community that are risking that. But, like as a poet, you get a charge out of saying something that you know is going to push somebody else's buttons, that it's going to seem to them like you're undermining their beliefs. It's safe for me because they're not my beliefs. The outrage may be, a way of getting a rise out of somebody for language that I use. And then I think there's genuinely generative, like blasphemy is a generative category, a way of mapping, a way of looking at the world and the universe and saying, here's the edge. And blasphemy is like the ship that if you want to go over the edge and see what's outside this way of looking at the world, come with me. So we're not trying to undermine the world as it's constituted, but let's see if there are dragons in that unmapped part of the universe.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm also thinking about, you're familiar with the rules against lashon hara. So in Judaism, there's a long-standing discussion and set of practices around not speaking ill of others. And there's a prescription against gossip in general. And I've always appreciated that in Judaism, because I feel like, a lot of us are going to get through this life. We're going to be fortunate to not hopefully kill somebody, for example, or, or make a big theft, or, a lot of us are going to get through this life being pretty law abiding. But who can get through a day without gossiping? That's why I've always thought the lashon hara was such an interesting focus for the ethical teachers in Judaism. At the same time, I'm queer. LGBTQ people, we like our gossip. Gossip is like philosophy in the queer department. So I don't know. I've been trying to reconcile this my whole life. On the one hand, I really do believe that lashon hara is something that I shouldn't be engaged in. I try not to badmouth people or I certainly don't spread rumors about others. On the other hand, when I get together with my friends, like who's seeing who and what happened to that person. And, I don't know, how have you balanced that? Or has that ever even been a contradiction for you?
I would rephrase that as, have you ever been thoughtful enough to worry about this, in time to make a decision? And I'm not sure that the answer to that is yes. Retroactively, I thought, maybe I should have thought about lashon hara there. But I think that the difference between real communities and like when people say the trans community, which is just, that's a metaphoric community. There is no the trans community. There are communities of trans people, but you can tell you're in a real community when there's gossip. There doesn't have to be a shared core of beliefs in a community, but people have to know each other well enough to gossip about each other. And so this question of what kind of speech is harmful and what isn't is really crucially important. And on the one hand, it's how we get tied together. It's how we become entertainment and TV for each other, but also the people we know best, become ways we reflect on what our values are, what our choices are. Did so-and-so do the right thing or the wrong thing? What's that telling me about what I should do? The rules against lashon hara are really great, except when you start thinking about things like there's a rabbi or an authority figure who is sexually molesting people. And the rules against gossip say you're not allowed to say that because that's prohibited speech. So in that morally terrible situation, you can see that, as you're saying, there's this very positive function of people being able to talk about other people being able to share information about other people, and even being able to apply value judgments to what the people and members of the community do. It can be horribly destructive, and it can be life-saving and necessary. And I'm not sure that there's any set of laws that helps us know which one we're doing at a given time.
Well, I'm glad we resolved that.
Yes. I'm sure Daniel's feeling completely illuminated now.
Maybe we should go on to another question.
Hey, Greg, it's Fred Moten. Are we ready for Exodus?
Fred and I have been talking about Exodus for quite some time. I think I told you about this, Joy. Fred and I are part of this group of people, a very diverse group of people who've been looking at the notion of Exodus and the Exodus story and how it's shared. That the biblical story of Exodus has animated quite a number of historical movements. Of course, for Judaism, Exodus is the story of liberation from slavery, but Exodus is also a very important narrative to the civil rights movement. And I guess I'll start to answer that from Fred. So thank you, Fred, for that question. So who are the Israelites? And where exactly are we going? And I think those are the questions that should be addressed when looking at Exodus. I always think about that because the Israelites are the protagonists of a story. They are a group of people who are not yet a nation, but are finding enfranchisement in some form and are being liberated. But what does it mean to dwell in Exodus? For those of us, like I'm fine in Crown Heights. Like I don't feel like I'm like fine in the diaspora. I don't even think I'm in the diaspora. Actually, diaspora Judaism is my model of Judaism. If I was to go home, it would be Queens. So when Fred asks, are we ready for Exodus? I think he's posing the question of what is the trajectory? What is the map? What is the way toward liberation? How do we move forward? And I also think it's a personal question too, because I also think that there's a part of us that experiences the Exodus story as it relates to our situation within a community, but each of us have had our own journeys toward self-liberation, self-determination. So I like the open-ended question because it's a question that begs more questions. And what's a better question than that?
I heard somebody, this is my middle-aged form of attributing credit where it's due. I heard somebody say that one of the things about the Exodus story as a story is that everybody is in all of the positions. Like, you don't get to just be in one of the positions. So one way of saying it is, in what parts of my life am I the Israelites who are enslaved and have no hope? In what parts of my life am I the Israelites who are enslaved but have been awakened to the possibility of freedom? In what aspects am I in the wilderness? I've left something behind, but I haven't yet gotten to what's there. I may not even be capable of getting to what the next thing is. In what parts of my life am I Pharaoh, enslaving myself or other people? And, saying yes to God one minute and, saying backsies the next minute. And in what parts of my life am I God, where I am the one who gets to make the decisions about what parts of me are free and what parts of me are bound, and when I get to leave and when I have to stay, and who dies in the meantime.
It's very important to recognize the complexity of the story, and I really appreciate the question. And this notion of Exodus, I think, is a really good idea that Fred is putting forward, because I track it also intellectually too. Like, when post-structuralism was popular, there was nomadism, this notion of being mobile, deterritorializing, reterritorializing. And then when we were informed greatly by post-colonial theory, the notion of diaspora was very important. And the idea of the Black diaspora is an extremely important notion when thinking about post-colonialism. And still, I think in an existential way, I don't know, I made that joke about Queens, but I also, some part of me still feels like I wake up in Exodus, in the sense that I have to always ask, like, how am I going to proceed with the day? And what am I going to follow? Where does my faith come from today? Do you relate to that at all?
Yeah, although it in a very intellectually regressive way, I guess I would say. Because when you were talking, I was thinking about how Joseph Campbell didn't, I think there was some anti-Semitic stuff, but just in terms of his theory of the hero's journey, the Torah really doesn't work. The stories that we find in the Hebrew Bible don't work because there's no one goal. There's no moment when you attain the goal and you become the fully realized hero. Instead, it remains a mess all the way through. The Israelites have better moments and then they have worse moments. Jacob wrestles the angel, gets the new name Israel, and then sometimes he's Jacob and sometimes he's Israel afterward. And he's often a schmuck, whatever the Torah happens to be calling him. So it was these ways of telling stories didn't fit into the kind of hero's journey that is teleological, that has clear moral goals and stages where you can say, all right, now you have nailed it. Instead, being in process, it feels like there's something that that is akin to a lot of the post-structuralist ideas that you were talking about, and that clearly gave Joseph Campbell hives when he tried to, archetype us.
Yes. But I want to ask, actually, in your book, your wonderful book, The Soul of the Stranger, you talk a lot about transition. You say that there are no trans people in the Bible, but there are transitions or trans moments. I was wondering if you think of these as Exodus moments or related to Exodus in some way.
Yeah, I do. I say it's impossible to tell if there are people we would now consider trans in the Torah because people don't self-identify in terms of gender. We just don't know. If as trans people will tell you, if people don't tell you how they identify in terms of gender, you can't tell from the outside. So the Torah just gives us these, from the outside, you seem to be this kind of looks at that. But it gives us many, many moments. Many of the key narratives are times when people leave the ways of life or categories they were born into, and they do something different. Sometimes it's something that contradicts those categories. Sometimes it's something that transforms them. The way Abraham goes from being Abram, a certain kind of a nomad, to Abraham, a very different kind of a nomad. The Exodus is that idea writ large. Those slaves were born to be slaves. Whether or not they identified themselves that way, and there are reasons to think that at least some of them did. They have real ambivalences about leaving the situation in Egypt. The entire people is uprooted and told, you have ceased to be the thing you were born into, and you're going to have to walk before you become the other kind of, like, citizens of a nation. It's going to take some time, and then it's like, well, you're going to die without ever getting there. So I would say being trans in terms of that experience, that becomes what most of the time that's covered in the 5 books of Moses is about, the entire people being in transition that they never complete.
Yes, and reflecting back on Fred's question, I hear what you're saying about being born into or determined into a position and wanting or desiring or needing to get out of that determination. And that is the journey. And I think that's enfolded in Fred's question, actually.
I think I would be a better person if I woke up every day and said, are we ready for Exodus? That's the way I started the day. I think that's always a good question.
I am so grateful to you, Joy, for joining me today in answering questions and continuing our dialogue. I'm so fortunate to know you, and I look forward to the next time we speak, which I hope is very soon, which I actually know is going to be very soon. So thank you very much for being here.
Oh, and thank you. The feelings of gratitude are mutual, and I love this way of getting to relate to you. We keep finding new ways to relate to one another. I've never had a friendship start this way, but it is pretty fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Take care. Right now, it's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome my dear friend, Kendall Thomas, who's going to perform some songs with us and give us some advice, answer some questions. I've known Kendall for 30 years. Kendall is a brilliant person, a legal scholar, one of the leading lights behind critical race theory, author of many publications and essays, an activist, a lifetime activist from the boardroom to the streets, and also a performer. As long as I've known Kendall, Kendall has performed music, is a very talented musician. And recently, within the last few years, Kendall has had a regular yearly gig at Joe's Pub. And I've just so much enjoyed seeing Kendall take full command of his instrument as a singer and a musician. And we're really lucky that Kendall's going to be performing some songs for us today. Thank you, Kendall.
Thank you. One day I'll grow up, I'll be a beautiful woman. One day I'll grow up and I'll be a beautiful girl. One day I'll grow up and I will be a beautiful woman. One day I'll grow up, I'll be a beautiful girl. But for today I am a child. For today I am a boy. But for today I am a child who is a boy. One day I'll grow up, I'll feel the power within me. One day I'll grow up, of this I am sure. One day I'll grow up, I'll know who is within me. One day I'll grow up, I'll feel it full and pure. But for today, I am a child who is a boy. But for today, I am a child who is a boy. But for today, I am a child who is a boy. But for today, I am a child who is a boy. I shall be free. I shall be free. I shall be free someday. One day I'll grow up, be a beautiful, beautiful woman. One day I'll grow up and be a beautiful girl. One day I'll grow up and be a beautiful woman. One day I'll grow up and be a beautiful girl. One day I'll grow up and be a beautiful woman. One day I'll grow up and be a beautiful girl. But for today, I'm a child. Today I am a boy. But for today, I am a child who is a boy. One day, a boy who is a girl.
Woo! 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 was beautiful, Kendall. That was beautiful.
Thank you, my love.
That was beautiful.
That was a world premiere, by the way.
Yes, of you singing that song.
Right. It was an apartment premiere, at least for a virtual audience, of me singing that song. Yes, it's a song I love very much, and it's a song that I had planned to sing a few months ago at Joe's Pub. I was going to do a show called My Queer Jazz Songbook. And the premise of the show was to sing songs which are forbidden, right, to men, or which are part of a queer canon that's in the making. And this song is a song that was written and recorded by Anthony and the Johnsons. But it takes me back to my childhood, when I had a really rich fantasy life, and I would sing songs that I didn't really know I wasn't supposed to sing. And there's that moment of socialization in which this thing that is not just a source of incredible pleasure, but of boundary crossings, right, of pure fantasy, gets constricted. And you're told, well, these are boy songs, and those are girl songs, and you can't sing girl songs. But then I found this song, Today, for Today I Am a Boy. And I thought I would gift it to you, since when I think about it, so much of what I know experientially about living a queer life, I've learned either from you or through you or alongside you. So today I'm a boy, but someday I'll grow up.
Thank you for the Zoom apartment premiere of your rendition. Maybe we should answer some questions.
Sure.
Jean Carlamusto calling from New York. Here's a question. Seems like people become more religious as they head into their senior years. I saw it with my parents and their return to the Catholic Church. I'm also experiencing it with my own Buddhist practice that is only intensified after 30 years. Yet every religion has oppressed in the name of their God. What's your advice for those of us delving deeper into our religious spiritual practices on dealing with religious institutions that oppress? Okay, that's it. And give Kendall a big hug for me. Bye-bye, sweetie.
Jean Carlamusto, we love Jean. Jean and I met making videos for the gay men's health crisis in the late 80s, and we've been friends ever since. Wonderfully talented video maker and documentarian who both of us know. I'll take a crack at that first and then ask you, Kendall. Yes, Jean, I'm with you. I'm sitting here right now wearing a kippah, and much of my theological attention is about the ways in which that a rich and deep, engaged relationship to the religion can shift the politics, oppressive politics that religion has been used toward. And I think a lot about that. And there's one thing from the Talmud that I find very inspiring. In the Talmud, it instructs that you can't be a judge and adjudicate issues of Torah or Talmud unless you can use the Talmud against itself to change a law. And Kendall, you're a lawyer, and you also have your own theological concerns and beliefs. What do you think about that?
Well, there's a passage in one of Paul's letters, I forget which one, where he's talking about Jesus, whom he refers to in the King James Version as Christ. So he says somewhere that Christ has done what the law cannot do. So I think, any deep experience of spirituality, which for me is not in the least connected to religion, is on the other side of the law, right? It is by definition a realm beyond the boundaries of human codification. So interestingly, Gene, I've actually become less religious as I've gotten older and more spiritual. I was raised in the Black Protestant church. My grandfather, who was the patriarch of our family and who raised me as his son, was a Baptist minister. But a few years ago, I realized that the story of sin and salvation made no sense to me. And I had already begun, Gene, as you know, Vipassana meditation. And that practice has deepened as I've gotten older. And for me, just the cultivation of mindfulness of my senses, mindfulness of thought, is a much more profound experience than any story, any code, any law that I learned in organized religion. At the same time, I love and will always love the gospel music tradition and the spirituals tradition in which I was raised. But it's precisely through those songs that I found a way to the other side of theology. Buddhism is not a theological system. It's a practice that is based on the evidence of one's own experience. So we take refuge, but that refuge is not about believing in a God. So it's been an interesting journey for me in that regard.
Thank you so much, Kendall. We should go to another question.
Our dear friend, the writer Lynn Tillman writes, "Dear Gregg, people say they are spiritual, and I don't know what they are actually saying about themselves. What is it to be spiritual?"
It's a really good question. And for me, being spiritual is a direction. It's a disposition. I find that when I contemplate spirituality, I am disposed to humility. I direct myself to gratitude. And that helps me a lot, especially during trying times, to be grateful for my dear friends, to be grateful for even the smallest of things. So that's what it means to me to be spiritual, is to understand the generosity that is in the world, regardless or in spite of the hardships that we experience, and the ways in which we can express it. Kendall?
Paradoxically, I think being spiritual is about a certain relationship to the body. And just to build on the last question, as I've gotten older, I've moved away from the narrative in which I was raised that saw the body as a threat to spirituality, that saw the body as something that was to be mastered or mortified, literally, quite literally killed. People would speak in my religious tradition of the flesh and dying in the flesh so that you could come alive in the spirit. But I've come to a queer perspective on spirituality, which for me is about the ways in which spirituality involves befriending my body. There's a prayer that I learned a few years ago called the Atheist Prayer, which says simply, "Please help me regard myself with compassion." Right? And so this practice of cultivating compassion for one's impermanent body, this thing to which I certainly have a vexed relationship as someone Lynn knows I've struggled for some years now, over 15 years, with prostate cancer and the treatments and the surgeries to correct the things that have gone wrong with my body and the like. And that path, paradoxically, of illness and really being forced to reckon with the impermanence of this body has been a way for me to befriend this body. And through befriending myself, practicing compassion toward myself, being able to share or to greet the world and others with an attitude of friendship. And so, some of my most spiritual moments, Lynn, have actually been with you.
That's beautiful. God, we could talk for hours about this. I'm thinking about the queer theorists who advanced the idea that there's something queer about being Jewish and something racy about being queer.
Racy about being queer. Interesting. I don't know what that means. I do know, since we're talking about bodies and friendship, that the first spiritual moment that I had with you, Gregg, was I remember you dressed all in white, as you were wont to do, white denim in those days. We were kissing on the corner of 116th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. I was an untenured professor, and a group of my students walked by and said, "Hello, Professor Thomas." And that was the beginning of a kind of integration of my public and private self, of my professional and personal self, that was kind of forced on me, but which at the same time, is of a piece with this thematic of integrating the body, and we haven't used this word yet, the soul, right? And I think this is a moment for me to put on my kippah, which reminds me of many delightful Sunday afternoons back in the day at the tea dance, Body and Soul. And so this, I don't know that this integration is ever fully possible, but the soul is lived through the body, through the modality of the body, and the body knows what the soul or what soul is, what soul music, soul love is. The body makes that accessible in the same way that we live our sexuality in the modality of race, and race in the modality of gender, and this practice of estranged intimacy with all these disparate yet connected parts of ourselves is, I think, profoundly spiritual. Coming to terms with our brokenness, our wholeness, all these parts of ourselves that confront us moment to moment with the paradox of being alive. There is something queer about that. There's a queer sensibility about that that I'm just learning to tap into.
I remember those moments. I saw you perform in the LGBTQ church in the East Village. You were part of a gospel choir. I remember you sang "I Am Glad." And then you were stepping around the church. You were aloft, Kendall. I remember you were aloft with the Spirit, and it was not too different from going to tea dance with you.
No. Well, that choir was called the Jerice Johnson East Village Gospel Choir. Jerice Johnson was an incredible African-American musician who played at the Middle Collegiate Church in the East Village. And he died of HIV, and the choir which he had started was named after him. And so it was this gospel choir that was completely queer, and whose spiritual power adhered precisely in the ways in which it was borrowing from all these musical traditions, including gospel music, to make something new. So that was another deeply spiritual part of my journey, of which, as you said, you were part. I'd forgotten about that.
There were many moments at the dance floor, either at Body and Soul or the Sound Factory. I remember you coming by my Chelsea apartment at that time, like at midnight, because that's when you went to the Sound Factory.
It was in the early morning, because remember we used to meet at Florent, like for
Right.
4 or 5 o'clock for coffee, and then we'd go. And you know what the club kids called it? They called going to Sound Factory going to church, because
Yes.
many of them brought their choir robes with them to the club and went from the club to church. And I did that when I first came to New York. Now that's a queer spirituality. So I mean, I personally think there's no spirituality worth the name that's not queer. I think, for example, of there's this marvelous line in Ntozake Shangi's For Colored Girls where toward the end they sing, I found God in myself. I found God in myself. I love her fiercely. I love her fiercely. I found God in myself. That's a queer, womanist, black feminist, aesthetic re-rendering of spirituality and of the idea of God, which returns us, by the way, to the earliest incarnation of God, which the historians tell us was not masculine and patriarchal, but feminine and maternal.
So, Lynn, I really hope we answered your question. Kendall and I have been speaking about spirituality, theology, religion, what it's done for us, where it failed us. This is not a new conversation for us, and Kendall is one of my most valued interlocutors around this and many other questions. But I think it's time for another song. Kendall, would you grace us with another song, please?
Sure. This is a song, one of my favorite songs by Carole King, which is in the form of a question. And I always sing this song in character. It lends itself to that. I don't know who the character will be, but I offer it to you, Gregg. Tonight you're mine completely. You give your love so sweetly. Tonight the light of love is in your eyes. But will you love me tomorrow? Is this a lasting treasure or just a moment's pleasure? Can I believe the magic of your sigh? Baby, will you love me tomorrow? Tonight with words unspoken, you say that I'm the only one. But will my heart be broken when the night meets the morning sun?
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Kendall. This was a great episode. So much fun. A lot of rich conversation. I'm having so much fun with these episodes. The last one is December 2nd, devoted to the comedian, the figure of the comedian. And who better to ask to join me than Morgan Bassicus? Not only is Morgan showing up, but the illustrious Pearl will be our musical guest December 2nd, the final episode of Answers with Questions.
You say that I'm the only one, but will my heart be broken when the night meets the morning sun? I'd like to know that your love is a love I can be sure of. So tell me now, I won't ask again. Darling, will you love me tomorrow? Tell me now, and I won't ask again. Will you love me tomorrow? Tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kendall. Thank you for being part of this. I love you. I love you very much. And I'm so grateful.
Tomorrow.
I will love you tomorrow.
Question. That is the question.
I will love you tomorrow. I'll keep loving you.